Hello and welcome to Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink. And today we'll be diving into the first in our new series, X-Rated and Animated, The World of Ralph Bakshi, where we'll be digging into the work of a true and controversial auteur of animated cinema. Today we'll be discussing Fritz the Cat from 1972.
All the stuff to see and all the kicks and all the girls are out there. And me, a writer and a poet who should be having adventures and experience in all the diversities and paradoxes and ironies of life and passing over all the roads of the world and digging all the cities and towns and rivers and the oceans and making all of them chicks. Oh, God. As a writer and a poet, it is my duty to get out there and dig the world. To swim with the whole friggin' scene while there is still time, man.
Fritz the Cat, which is Ralph Bakshi's first feature-length animated effort, follows a hypocritical, swinging college student who is literally a cat as he explores New York City and travels out west in an iconic trip through 60s counterculture and rebellion.
Mm-hmm. And Fritz the Cat was a character created by Robert Crumb, the infamous and perhaps most well-known of the underground comics artists of the 60s and 70s. And there's a whole bunch of contention and controversy surrounding this film and Fritz's original creator, which I think we should kind of circle back and come back to after we talk about the film, because that's kind of its own section there. So,
Yes.
So, Jeremy, what were your first impressions?
Well, yeah, so this is a pretty wild film. I was mentioning to Mark before we even started recording here, I feel like I've seen this film before for some reason. It's one of those weird films where the imagery is kind of so ubiquitous and you've probably seen clips of it somewhere at some point in your life, because for me it just felt very familiar. Maybe it was just a stylistic thing. I'm not sure if I watched some other of Ralph Bakshi's less adult work as a kid, and maybe that's why the style felt so familiar to me, or something like that. But this is a really punchy, wild film that pretty accurately, I think, dives into some of the complicated, wild lives of what it meant to be a young person in the late 1960s or early 1970s.
Yeah, it's certainly a commentary on the 1960s. It not exactly subtle about it in a lot of ways, because I guess the fact that it's animated actually helped it in a lot of ways, because I mean, the film literally begins with a hippie getting pissed on, so it's not gonna, it's really just laying it out there for you. He walks beneath these steel rafters of a building that these construction workers are working on, and that's how the movie starts out. Like, as the credits start to roll, you see like the yellow stream coming down. So this film is not shy or necessarily subtle, like I said, in its messages, but that's also the kind of person that Ralph Bakshi is. He's a very visceral, kind of energetic. He throws things at the wall and sees what sticks. He's that kind of person. So he comes right out the gate with his first film. And like I said, I think he uses the animated medium to his advantage. He's able to show heightened characters and events and situations in that way, and he does use anthropomorphic animals and
in this film, not in every film,
not in every film, but he uses that, and he deals in a lot of stereotypes, which he would go on to explore more in the next film that we'll talk about, Heavy Traffic, which is a lot more personal for him, and of course Coonskin as well. And I think with this movie, he took the character that existed, and he did his own thing with it. He took it in a different direction, which is part of the reason, I'm sure, why R. Crumb is not super happy with this movie. Because as you said, Jeremy, Ralph Bakshi is an auteur, and I think he puts his own stamp on things, and that's what he did with this movie. So he did that, but he also, like we talked about, it is also commentary on the 60s. So I want to talk about that a little bit. He goes into the hypocrisy mostly, like, he has white characters discussing with his what's supposed to be a black character about how much they respect African Americans and stuff like that. It obviously comes off as insensitive on their part, kind of ignorant. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And at the same time, though, I would say no one is spared, because from from the youth and drug culture, and then he goes to the old guard with like the cops, that are depicted as
literally pigs.
Literally pigs, yeah. And they're very inept, So I think from the left wing to the right wing, I think he kind of hits all those notes equally. And I wanted to ask you, because it was released, so soon after the 60s ended. Do you think that helped the film? Do you think that allowed the filmmakers to kind of look back on the previous decade, with a little more perspective after it was over? You think that was a good thing that they waited?
Yeah, so I think that the timing of this movie was super, super important to just the content and how the public responded to the content, but B, just kind of the audience and who would be connecting to it. Yeah. There's a famous quote, and I'm not going to get it verbatim because I am not capable of quoting such a long quote as verbatim, but in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Hunter S. Thompson talks about the crashing of the wave, referring to the hippie culture and how at some point it all kind of just collapsed on itself. And, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, I believe, came out in either 1970 or 1971. So when this is being written, that's the kind of idea in the cultural zeitgeist. It's this big hippie movement that all of a sudden, the Manson murders happened, Altamont happened with the fan getting killed during the Rolling Stones concert, and all of these people who were supposed to be about love and peace and said that the drug culture wasn't anything violent or bad are all of a sudden having it all kind of crashing in on themselves. And I think Ralph Bakshi, he's from New York City. And like I've mentioned probably more than I should on this podcast, I live in New York City. And there is this weird thing, particularly around NYU. So the early scenes in this movie take place in Washington Square Park, which is pretty much like NYU basically surrounds Washington Square Park, and could almost be considered like a quad, as you would see at a normal university. That's kind of just where all the NYU kids hang out. And NYU is known as being kind of a historically progressive college that attracts a lot of these young hippie kids, but also with that, it attracts a lot of people who are just kind of getting into those movements because it's a wave that they're trying to ride. It's a cultural movement that they want to be part of. And I don't think that Ralph Bakshi is so much attacking the people who are actually have something to say politically in this movie. I think he's more attacking those people who are just getting in on the hippie movement and things like that because they want to take drugs, they want to party, they want to have a lot of sex. They don't actually have any real conviction to the ideas that were tied to the movement. And I think that that's why Fritz is a complicated character, is because he's someone who, he's not really like that where he's just doing these movements. He's just getting involved with these different movements, everything from hippies to neo-Nazis. He's not getting involved with all that so much because it's just a trendy thing. I think he's really a guy who's out there looking for answers, which makes him an interesting person to follow because I think, we're all kind of out here looking for answers. So he's so naive that it makes him an interesting person to get behind and watch navigate this really complicated world that he's not even prepared for.
He's looking for answers, but at the same time, Fritz as a character, he just wants to have a good time, explore, experiment, which is obviously of that time. But he is, I would say, misguided, to say the least. The way he tries to achieve those things is not always the best. And I think the joke may ultimately be on him most of all, in a way, of the film. Because like you said, he does want answers, but it's like at the end of the day, how deep is Fritz really? I think at the end of the day, he really just wants to. At the very end of the film, you see how he goes on this long, starts to go into like a monologue that has a message to it, but really it just turns into a big orgy, and it's like, all right, that's kind of where he was going with that. So, and it's interesting because again, Fritz as a character did exist mostly in the '60s. Is when most of the comics were out there with him. So I think it's interesting that Bakshi took that and kind of, because it was after the 60s now, he kind of like turned it on its head a little bit and did something different with it.
He made it a little darker. And one thing to note, which is where, the series title, X-rated and animated, comes from. I believe that was actually something that was used on a poster for Fritz the Cat or something, not exactly like that, but along those lines. And this was I believe, the first X-rated animated feature film.
I believe so. Yeah.
So it was kind of also a cultural moment. You know, I mean, this film was wildly successful. I think it made something like $90 million against.
Yeah, it was very successful.
Yeah, small budget. But it was a really punchy thing that people hadn't seen before. You know,
it's hard to be successful with an X rating too. I mean, we'll talk about that more later, but yeah,
especially
so
then.
It's
I think
especially
now,
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now a lot of things are released unrated and things like that. But yeah, back then it was like very unheard of that you would go see an X-rated movie, in the theater, unless it was a porno. So
yeah, I mean, this is only 40 years after the Hays Code was put in place.
Yeah, and a lot of people assumed this was like a porno too. Like people didn't really understand that it was a legitimate film. I think at first it took a while, and then eventually they got picked up by a lot of festivals, and I think they were in Cannes, right? I believe as well. So yeah, I mean they definitely started to gain some traction and get some cred. And I think we'll go back and talk about the X rating a little bit after we discuss the film itself a little bit more, because I want to talk about a big thing with Bakshi that I noticed, Jeremy, is his style is very apparent, his animation style. And I think in this film he introduces that style, and it's the way I would describe it is raw yet realistic. And it has a lot of naturalistic voice acting as well. The characters tend to sound conversational and genuine. Like they don't sound like they're voice acting in quotes like most people were likely used to at the time. Because usually it's not very for as over the top the animation was and the characters were, the dialogue's very subdued. And
it does have a certain naturalism to it, which is something with animation you don't always get. It's hard, And
that's something that you'll see throughout his films is that kind of dialogue, and he's able to have his characters have they discuss nuanced and complicated issues, which you don't always see in animated films as well. And also he improvised a lot. I mean, he literally took a tape recorder out in New York and just walked around and would just record people. His audio people that worked on the film hated him for it, but
I would imagine so.
He would turn it over to them and they'd be like, "This is unusable. We can't,
can't do anything with this."
But he just, he really believed that this is a raw, real thing, and I think he ended up using most of that. Most of the audio from the film is just from his recorded tapes, and like I said, a lot of improvisation, the beginning scene with when the cops come. Actually, Bakshi is one of the voices of those cops, oddly enough.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I wasn't aware of that.
So he was just kind of riffing there with the other guy, and stuff like that. Also, he would just ask people questions in bars and stuff like that, and get their reactions. So I think that's a really cool and unique way to approach an animated film as well.
Yeah, and I think hitting on that with Ralph Bakshi, because his films, it's one of those things where we can talk about the plots. But once again, when you're digging into an animated film, I think in particular, watching a film like that just for plot, if that's how you're watching it, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. I think kind of the ideas that are being presented, particularly because in a live action film, there are things that can work their way into the film that are circumstantial or even accidental or surprising just because of the nature of production. Whereas on an animated film, every single inch of the frame is being thought out. Nothing's just being thrown in there.
There's no accidents, really.
Yeah. So I think that a film like this is really a study. And I think that, so talking about Ralph Bakshi's process is kind of a good use of our time here, I think, because he was really interesting both in the way he would record audio, but also just in terms of how he built his settings. He would actually go out in New York City or any locations he was going to that he could get his hands on, and he would take pictures and have his animators and himself draw over that. So he really was concerned with this sense of gritty realism, and I think that's one of the things that, for me personally, I'm so drawn to about these worlds he creates. Later, he would actually use rotoscoping in his films to literally take real images and then animate them.
Yeah, he was very interested in that process, that technique.
Yeah, but in this film, for me, the fact that he was getting these real settings is something that kind of elevates this and makes it feel just a little bit different than other animated films you would see, because there is that street level feel. And you got to think, the landscape of cinema at this time, I personally would consider this part of the new Hollywood movement. It's a movie, and he's a filmmaker who doesn't get talked about a lot, but I mean, there are stories with Ralph Bakshi, you know, he knew Francis Ford Coppola, he knew George Lucas, he knew Scorsese, like all these guys who were in New York a lot.
Right.
Although Coppola and Lucas were from LA, but you know,
still, yeah.
it was still that wave of filmmakers who were all kind of in that same boat. And I think that this is one of those films that totally has that gritty, realistic. This could easily be, if you made this live action, I could easily see this having a similar tone and look as a Taxi Driver or a Panic in Needle Park or one of those very gritty 70s movies.
And that's what he was going for, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what you said is true, because I think animation has such a stigma to it that, to me, Ralph Bakshi is as much an auteur as everyone else that you mentioned there, but he doesn't get, you know, he doesn't get put into those groups because he's an animator. But I think the way he approaches his films, the way I noted it was I said stylized realism, which is, you know, as you said, like he would have his animators trace photographs that he took, things like that. And I wanted to read this quote because I think it's important to get the idea of who the man is. The idea behind, like, basically his philosophy when he goes into a movie, to making a movie, because he wanted this film, when he first started out, he wanted it to be the antithesis of the animated film produced by the Walt Disney Company. Yeah. And that totally makes sense when you watch this movie.
It does.
And I have a quote I wanted to read by him. He's a very quotable person, by the way. He's very outspoken. If you've never seen an interview with him or heard him speak, you have to look him up. He is very entertaining and thought-provoking. And so of this film, Fritz the Cat, Bakshi said, "My approach to animation as a director is live action. I don't approach it in the traditional animation ways. None of our characters get up and sing because it's not the type of picture I'm trying to do. I want people to believe my characters are real, and it's hard to believe they're real if they start walking down the street singing." So he was, even though these are anthropomorphic animals, he is going for a sort of realism and, like you said, street level way of approaching it. I think that is what makes him different, and that's why this film stood out so much at the time.
Yeah, and I think it's why it holds up.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
I mean, there are obviously things in it now that we look at and we might cringe a little bit, just because of the subject matter. But it's one of those things where I think that the thing that Ralph Bakshi is kind of actively attacking is our
perception and our reaction.
Our perception and our natural instinct to cringe. Right. You know, I think that's what good satire does, because I do think that to a certain extent this is a satire. You know, he's not portraying like the settings and the feeling are realistic, but these are cartoonish exaggerations of human beings and the way we view them. And for a little background on Bakshi, like he's from an area in Brooklyn called Brownsville. Which is kind of a lower income area where there's a lot of diversity. You know, there's a lot of illegal kind of dangerous dealings going on. So he's someone who, you know, he's not coming from a really sheltered perspective and making guesses at what all these different people around New York City and around the world are like. He's lived it. He's had these real experiences, and I think that's why he feels empowered, for lack of a better term.
Well, he was embedded in that lifestyle and that like he you know, he as a young child he actually went to an all African American school. I believe he was like the only white kid there until they pulled him out of there. But yeah, I mean he's a real deal. He embeds himself in his material, and he makes his films from his life and from what he's seen, and from, you know, conversations he's had with people and things that he's heard. So I think he definitely comes at it from his own point of view, and I think we should talk about his beginnings a little bit, the beginnings of Bakshi himself. So he started out, his first job was with Terry Tunes, which was like basically like a Saturday morning type of program put on, I believe it was CBS that was in charge of that. And he would his very first job was basically getting rid of like dirt and smudges on the cells and things like that. So that was his job, and he would commute 4 hours there and back, you know, to get there, because even though he lived in New York, he wasn't in the city at that point. But you know, he really worked his way up, and he somehow from that he got to working on actual animation, and then he went on to directing, and you know, he actually got his own imprint there under his own name. So it's very impressive. I think people just saw that he had this raw talent, and they wanted to harness it, and they saw how driven he was because that first job he had at the studio, someone commented like, oh, we thought you would have quit by now because of what we were making you do. So it's like the fact that he showed up every day and that he was so tenacious and he had that drive, I think that it comes from that auteur nature that he just wanted to make his own films. So, and also it's interesting that he started out, with kid-friendly fare because of where he went. But I think he obviously always wanted to make his own more adult-centered entertainment. But I think it's interesting where he came from. So eventually he was able to, he wanted to make his own personal film, and he had the idea for a film called Heavy Traffic, which is the next film we'll be talking about. But because he's right out the gate as an animator and no one knew who he was really, the producer that he was working with, Steve Krantz, he suggested that he work with an established title. And Ralph Bakshi was very into comics. He would read comics all the time, and he came across R. Crumb's work with Fritz the Cat, and he liked the character a lot and was, thought the strips were entertaining, and he thought he could do something with that. So he figured, maybe I'll make this my first film. I'll take these comic strips and I'll adapt them into a feature. And really it was that producer, Steve Krantz, that helped him a lot. He was kind of like a well-known guy at the time. He worked with he was a writer for Milton Berle and Steve Allen, stuff like that. And he helped him, I believe he got him a job working on Spider-Man, animating that show as well. So he helped him, and I think he was kind of like the link between actually getting from the character Fritz the Cat to actually having Ralph Bakshi meet with Robert Crumb and talk to him about making the film. Which at first Robert Crumb was all into the idea.
He was on board.
But... Yeah, he was on board. He liked what he was going to do with it. But I think as the film itself developed and and Bakshi started to put his own ideas into it more, I think he started to shy away from it a little bit. But I guess I guess we should talk about that now with the character, because I think it's very interesting. Do you want to go into that a little bit about what happened with the actual character of Fritz the Cat, with R. Crumb's feelings on the film?
Yeah. So from what I understand, R. Crumb saw the film after the fact and was not only dissatisfied but just hated, totally hated this film. He thought that what Bakshi had done was basically take his character and just totally bastardize him and tear him apart and turn him into something totally different. And then I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, didn't R. Crumb then after that eventually he killed Fritz the Cat in his comics?
He did.
Right? He killed Fritz the Cat. He was so upset about how... Yeah,
his final statement on the matter, I guess.
Yeah. He decided that Bakshi had ruined it so much in such an irreversible way that the creator of this beloved character would rather see the character be dead than see people continue to perceive him as the character that Bakshi had created.
Yeah,
or had evolved.
Yeah, I mean, that's... Because he doesn't, R. Crumb doesn't talk about it much, but I've tried to look up, him speaking about it. He really doesn't. He's actually mentioned that he kind of blacks that period out because I guess it just disturbs him so much. Yeah. Which is interesting because, I have respect for both men, and, there's two sides to every story and every argument or anything like that. So you have to take that into account. And so it's one of those weird things for me because... like I said, I've read R. Crumb and I do enjoy his comics, and I actually read a decent amount of Fritz the Cat comics. And the thing is, I don't think, I wouldn't say that Bakshi necessarily got the character wrong or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think he was pretty true to what the character was in the comics, but he just took it in different places, and I guess was a little, too overtly political for Crumb's taste. Crumb saw a lot of the film as kind of anti-left wing, which I guess, like I said, I think both sides get it pretty equally in the film.
Yeah, he's as and I think we've used this term before. Ralph Bakshi is an equal opportunity destroyer.
Yeah.
There's no one, if someone is behaving in a certain way that Bakshi finds unfavorable or, morally wrong, he will not hesitate to just take them down, regardless of their affiliations or belief system.
And the other thing about that is that Bakshi thought the comic strip itself lacked a lot of depth, so he made changes to it that he thought made it more interesting. And a lot of those changes as we alluded to before, it made the world of the film a lot grimmer and more violent and hostile, which is not really what the comic strip was like. So I think that was another big difference there. It's a lot more, I guess, pessimistic would be the word. Because
it's not an optimistic movie. Like this movie is not saying things are going to be okay. This movie is pretty much saying
not at all.
Everything is going down the drain and it's not coming back.
And part of that is like you said, that kind of hit that bubble where they were looking back at the 60s and seeing things crashing down in a way. So they kind of could look at it with that perspective. But some of what Crumb has said about the film is that one quote is, he said, "They put words into his mouth that I never would have had him say." And apparently he filed a lawsuit to have his name taken off the credits of the film, which they are still on the credits. So I'm not sure what ended up happening with that.
Yeah,
I guess
I think the movie probably just did so well, and they made so many prints of it.
Yeah,
that it might have got taken off at some point, but not until everyone had already seen it and they already made all 1 million copies.
Right, and the film it did go on to be very successful. Although it was a long road. I would say the film had a very troubled production history. And there was a lot of controversy around the release. But yeah, eventually, even with the X rating, it was, so produced on a budget of, I'm seeing 700,000 here. It grossed over 90 million. So that is, for an animated film, an X-rated animated film, to come out at that time and to make that much money, that's pretty...
For any film on a $700,000 budget to make $90 million, that's a big deal. That's a splash.
Exactly, yeah. So there's something about it. It tapped into something. Maybe it was a zeitgeist, like you said, or I'm not sure exactly. Maybe people were just curious about it. Maybe the X rating actually helped them in the end. Well,
what's interesting to think about, too, is I would imagine that a large amount of the audience for this movie were the exact people that it was taking down.
Yeah.
Probably. It was probably a lot of those kind of post-hippies.
Yeah, let's smoke a J, go watch the movies.
Yeah, it's probably those people who are watching it saying, those idiots, exactly. Not realizing
this movie's
that.
Just like shitting all over them the whole time.
Yeah. But I think that's what makes it interesting and why it connects is it's hitting on something very true that even people who are attacked in this movie can maybe even find something to enjoy or
also,
laugh at themselves.
Our last series we talked about the Cheech and Chong movie Up in Smoke, and we had talked about how people that were similar to that lifestyle would go see that movie, but also people that didn't take drugs at all could go see that movie and have a great time with it. And I think this is similar, where you could just, no matter who you are, you could walk into the theater and have a good time with this film and enjoy it on a certain level. And you could respect it as a film, which wasn't really done at that time with animated movies, right? So, well, and I think one thing that I think is interesting with animated movies that they occasionally gets brought up, but particularly with like more adult animated things, like for me, for a little promotion, like I'm a huge fan of the show BoJack Horseman. And I don't know, do you watch BoJack Horseman, Mark? I saw the first season. I haven't watched it since then, but yeah.
So that show is really dark, like super dark, and it's it's funny, but it's really dark, kind of in the similar way that Fritz the Cat is. Very political, deals with things like depression, and I think that certain times, if used properly, animated shows can actually dive into much deeper, kind of truer, controversial issues, because there is that buffer when we're watching. We aren't saying those are real people. Like if this was a live action film, some of the things that the characters did in this that never go, like they never get punished or they never get discussed that they're wrong. I think if that was a live action film, we wouldn't be able to connect to those characters, because we'd say, oh, that's like we because you never really, ironically, we never really get the save the cat moment in this movie. Where like there's not like a redeeming thing for a lot of these characters, no. But for some reason you kind of just watch and it you'll say, oh, that's wrong, but it's not like an infuriating kind of wrong where you're saying that's irresponsible.
That's what makes it more real. Like the characters, they make mistakes and they are ignorant and they do things that you wouldn't necessarily want people to do, but that's the way that a lot of people are. So,
but I think the difference is that we don't need to see them get redeemed. In a live-action film, there needs to be that redeeming moment because we're watching real human beings. Yeah. And if we don't, then we're looking at them saying, all right, that's a villain. Like, that's just a straight-up villain.
It's almost the opposite. Like I talked about the end of the film where he kind of just forgets everything that he was even talking about and goes into an obscene act. So I mean, it's they knew what they were doing with the film, but as dirty in quotes, I guess, as you want to call this movie, and in its defense, I guess it is a little dirty, but I mean, also
it's pretty dirty.
It's pretty dirty. I mean, it starts with a guy getting pissed off.
Like you should have seen the film already at this point if you've gotten this far into the podcast. But if you're recommending it to anyone, do them a favor and don't say, "Oh, it's like a little dirty." Like don't watch this with your kids.
Yeah,
don't watch it with your parents.
Definitely don't watch it with your kids. Definitely don't do that. But because it was made in the early '70s, and I mean, this is maybe just me, the way I feel. I feel like things, when you look back on them, it's like, the stuff that comes out now is like 50 times worse. So it's like, it doesn't seem as dirty. But anyway, what I was getting at is like the X rating that they gave this film. I mean, was that justified? It's hard to say. The rating system is a whole nother conversation to have if it's even necessary or anything like that. But they were calling Fritz the Cat pornographic because only porno films would get that X rating, and so they the ratings board was arguing that this was basically a pornographic film, which Ralph Bakshi I think it justifiably was against, and he said animals having sex is not pornography. That's what he said. So and this is at the end of the day, it's a cartoon, and there was a lot of misconceptions about the film and its content, and so I think now people look back on it, I think it has a credibility because people know who Ralph Bakshi is more now, and they can look back on this and respect this film. But at the time, it took a really long time for people to get there, and actually it was in 1972. It did premiere at the Cannes Film Festival, and I think that really helped it. That, along with a lot of reviews that it was getting, like from Rolling Stone and New York Times, people were noticing the film and noticing that it had merit and more to it than just this is a dirty movie where animals have sex. I think so I mean, that X rating, that could be much debated. If it helped the film, if it didn't, I don't know.
I'd say it probably did.
It probably did, because I'm sure
at that time
it piqued people's curiosity, especially being the first feature film animated X-rated movie. So.
I mean, they put it on the poster. If they're putting it on the poster of the film, then chances are someone at some point said, every time we tell someone that this film is X-rated, they want to see it more. So there was probably that kind of...
Yeah. I doubt that was Bakshi's idea, but I'm sure... Once he saw
that,
the money coming in, he probably didn't mind too much.
That sounds like an executive. that is executive written all over it.
Yeah, like, we got to cash in on this X rating if we're going to have it. Which I guess you kind of have to, because just having that X rating is a fact that it doesn't get released to as many theaters, or it doesn't show as much. So
it can't show on TV.
You can't show it on TV. So I don't know. Actually, I didn't look into it, Jeremy. I don't know if you noticed. Does it still have an X rating, or has it been changed? Is it like R or unrated, or I don't know if you look that up, but I'm not sure, because sometimes ratings do get changed retroactively, which goes into my argument that the rating system is kind of dumb. But
well, I think I mean, it's possible it's been changed. I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah,
but
sometimes when it gets released on DVD or whatever,
but it's also weird because you'll see movies like Spaceballs or something like that. I don't know why this one just stuck with me. I think it's because I had a VHS of Spaceballs when I was a kid, which I'm also dating myself right now. But I remember that it was PG, and there were a lot of PG-13. So it's one of those things where, like, they might have just keep the rating that because I think you could see if a movie was kind of rated, like if you had a movie like this rated PG-13 because or PG because that's what the rating system was, and then they changed the system and reassessed and said, this is probably too obscene to be PG. I could see them making it R-rated, but I have a hard time seeing something that's already X-rated getting a change in the rating, because it's not like anyone who's gonna you're not putting it in front of any young people's eyes with an X rating. There's not the risk that the rating is going to expose people to it who shouldn't be seeing it, so they probably just left it.
Well, sometimes they'll also release a unrated edition, I guess, or something like that. But anyway, I was just curious. But so yeah, this film was rated X when it came out, and then there was a sequel to this film, by the way. It came out 1974, so a couple years later, called The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. Bakshi was not involved. Crumb obviously was not involved.
And was probably furious.
He was probably hiding under a rock somewhere at this point. And I'm sure he was was livid about this sequel coming out. So yeah, the sequel came out, and that was rated R. So that's an R-rated animated feature. And it was also a failure when it came out. It did not do well at all. It has somewhat of a cult following now, but still not as highly regarded as the original Fritz the Cat. I honestly don't even remember if I've seen it. I may have checked it out at some point. It must have been pretty forgettable, I guess. But mostly the reason I wanted to see this movie when I did first see it is because I did know who Ralph Bakshi was, and because I did enjoy his films, and I do see him as an auteur. I wanted to see his first movie, so that was the main reason I sought this out. And Jeremy, as you said, you probably saw some clips from it when you were younger, or may have seen the whole thing. Because it's one of those movies that people kind of like will pass around or be like, "Hey, check this out!" It's just kind of crazy. Because when you're younger, you see these animals doing these obscene acts and talking this way. It's
even now, like honestly, even now,
yeah, it does.
Still like watching this movie again now. I'm like, like there's a lot of crazy stuff you see, but like I could see this being like something that would be on YouTube, like internet shorts that are that like daring and dirty. But like I have a hard time, and maybe it's just because I'm not watching the right. Or I guess not right isn't the word, but I'm not watching a ton of animated programming. But like some of the stuff that they dare to do in this movie in terms of the content, like I have a hard time picturing a movie these days getting a wide release. Like an adult. I guess maybe like Sausage Party kind of takes it there, but even that compared to this is like relatively tame. Right. There's still a lot of euphemisms that kind of get thrown around.
It's interesting,
but like
because
this one, not so much.
Well, also it's just like the times, I feel like because PC, people are a lot more PC now, and I think things that were, I guess you could say acceptable back then, maybe would not be today. So, for example, there are some Jewish stereotypes at one point in the film. Bakshi is Jewish, and he's actually born in.
He was born in what was previously Palestine, but is now considered Israel.
Right. So he was born in essentially Israel. So I mean, that's up for a debate of how you feel about that, but there are things in the film that that can be seen as dangerous and still edgy to this day, for sure. I think it's that's just part of the film, and I think part of the man himself. And so I wanted to just wrap things up here. Sorry, I'm gonna scroll down to my thing here. So yeah, that's most of my thoughts on Fritz the Cat. I wanted to just say one other thing, and I think that this film is important for animated films and independent animators as well, because it did pave the way. I think Bakshi paved the way for independent animators like Bill Plimpton and others who are making their own original creations. But this, I think people saw this, other animators, other illustrators and things like that, and they were like, okay, I can do that, and I can work my way into the limelight a bit more, and I can make my crazy animated film, and I can do what I want, and it'll somehow work.
And it's not weird today to see, like, we're so used to seeing animated film and TV made for adults these days, but like back then there really was hardly any. And we kind of can take it for granted now because, if you turn on Netflix, you see BoJack Horseman, Big Mouth, Bob's Burgers. Like there's a lot of stuff that is actually made for. But like back then, this was kind of the thing.
Exactly.
So he really paved the way for so many young creative people.
You're very right. I think back then, you turn on the TV, you put a cartoon on. It's Donald Duck or
Bugs Bunny,
Mighty Mouse, who actually worked on that. But yeah, I mean, it was. Yeah, it's just and it's so you have that idea of it, and then someone makes a movie like Fritz the Cat, and it's mind blowing. And it is. I agree, Jeremy. I think it's hard to have that mindset now. If you see this film, I mean, you still feel the rawness of it, and it's still controversial, but you could never imagine like back when the film came out in 1972, what people must have thought about this. And it's a film that I talked about how it paved the way for other animators, but as much as it did that, it's also a film that had many imitators, I would say, and they people who tried to cash in on the idea of an adult oriented cartoon. But I would say most of them, probably all of them, were pretty unsuccessful, and none of them really grasped the audience's attention like Fritz the Cat did.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that had to do with, Bakshi was the first, and I think he struck at the right time, and he hit a vein. I think he hit something in this like zeitgeist, like you said, like, it's just so
the right time, right place, right person. Yeah.
It was 1972, right after the 60s. It's like, all right, I think we're ready to look back on what just happened and say what just happened.
So Mark, are there any particular images, or because I know we like to hit on this, are there any particular images or scenes that just kind of stuck with you after watching this film?
The beginning is really, I don't know. I think that part is just because I actually completely forgot about that, and I do like the way it starts with just an improvised conversation of these construction workers, because it really sets the tone for the film, like the things that they're talking about, and then the way it leads into the hippie walking beneath them. I think that's the part I always think of when I think about this movie, honestly. That and just like the wild party scenes and and also like not even scenes, but like the actual backgrounds. Like we talked about that a little bit, like how they're
stunningly beautiful.
They are the way they use the real photographs, you can really see that in a lot of the scenes. And just the way everything looks, like the characters and the world they live in, it's just it's very striking. But how about for you, Jeremy? What do you think about?
So it's kind of a lesser, like not even the super important moment or anything like that in the film, not one that gets talked about a lot, but there's just this one shot, and I actually took a screenshot of it, so maybe somewhere we can try to post this. But basically it's this moment when Fritz is just trying to hitchhike in the middle of the desert, and there's just this long winding road that's not drawn to correct perspective, but the sky is literally red, and the only way you can differentiate the sky from the ground is this little tiny ink drawn line, and Fritz just has his thumb out and his back is to I guess the camera. And I don't know, just something about it I think just totally encapsulated the whole movie for me. Just this idea of this innocent, sweet cat who's so like dirty and lost, just in the middle of nowhere, just trying to find his way. And that's something I love, like this idea that like portraying a youth as an animal that we traditionally would look at as like a cute and cuddly kind of thing, and for some reason that image just really stuck with me.
There's a lot of parts like that where he actually uses like experimental techniques to kind of show something in like an abstract way. I think he does that at certain points in the film, which he would go on to explore a lot more, but I think you can see him dipping his toe in the water with a lot of that. And I would say that this is definitely not my favorite of Bakshi's films, but you got to start somewhere. And I think, and like I said, I think you can see him finding his feet as an animator of feature films here. And in working with an already established character, I think it allowed him to actually try things, and take some risks that maybe he wouldn't necessarily have done otherwise. Like if he was making his own a script based off his own idea, maybe he wouldn't have had the courage to be as crazy with it, or as as in your face with it as he was with Fritz the Cat. So
definitely.
So what are your final thoughts on Fritz the Cat?
It's a really interesting, innovative movie that kind of doesn't seem to get talked about as much as some of the other interesting, innovative movies at the time. So I think an important movie to see, and an important movie to pass along. It's movies like this that don't have this, even though it was successful in its time. I don't think it's following. This is cult movie cult, and this is definitely a cult movie in the sense that its following is, I think, shrunk over time. So I think it's just one of those movies that it's important to talk about and kind of keep in the zeitgeist.
Right. Yeah, because as we said, when it came out, it was a big deal. But you really don't hear about it as much now. No. But for us, this is just the beginning. We're going to talk about many of Bakshi's films, not all of them, but we're going to try to hit on a lot of the main, most, I guess you would say, memorable. Notable films of his. And next, we are going to get a lot more personal with probably I'm not going to say my favorite, but one of my favorites of his, Heavy Traffic, is the next film we're going to talk about. Really excited to talk about that one. There's a lot to discuss there as well. But for now, thanks for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on iTunes, Podbean, and Spotify, and also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.